Hey everyone, and welcome to An Operator's Blog. In this episode, we will be discussing where is the real opportunity in AI for Indian startups, and how can Indian founders really leverage their unique strengths as well as manage their constraints to differentiate and win in the global AI marketplace. Joining me today is a very dear friend over more than a decade now, fellow investor in the US-India corridor, and also collaborator across the ecosystem, Rajan. So Rajan is managing partner at Upekkha. Upekkha is an AI SaaS accelerator that has invested in more than 100 startups started by Indian founders building global software products. Prior to this, Rajan was a product leader at Intuit. And I have something very interesting to tell you about Rajan. So he has created this amazing series of booklets called For Kids, where he really simplifies profound concepts from everyone from Naval Ravikant to Taleb to Morgan Housel, and in the form of really interesting coffee table books with illustrations. So I would really recommend everyone to check it out. I think you call it For Kids, Rajan, but I think it's very interesting for grown-ups as well. So please go to Rajan's blog, mtrajan.com, which in addition to his writings has all the booklets. Rajan, so good to have you.
Hey, Soumitra, so good to actually connect again, and I'm excited about our discussion right now.
Great. So let's get right down to it. So you authored a really amazing report recently on AI, where you drew out a very interesting distinction between generative AI and enterprise AI. So can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
So the first part, Soumitra, was to just say generative AI is different from traditional AI. I've been involved in building AI products like 15 years ago. And back then, the things that we were doing used to be very primitive. In fact, what I would say is that things that have happened till about 2017 or 18, anything that you take, any machine learning company, any AI company, I would again put them into the bucket of their traditional AI. Generative, most people, the technical guys will say that AI in that generative stands for, are you able to generate something? I would actually say that the distinction is that it is not just about the ability to technically generate something, but this is a new generation itself. Starting 2017-18, when people started using the transformer based architecture model, the output that was coming out of AI was like way better than anything that has happened in the past. So now what has happened is we've all known about ChatGPT, OpenAI, and many other companies which have built these foundation models where they are providing this AI capability through an API. So what has happened is the traditional AI is this AI which is using primitives, and AI that is generative onwards this is something that you're using it on an API. So it has pushed AI below the API. Before that, if you had to actually build anything in AI, any intelligent application, you have to staff a machine learning team, spend $10 million and see if your text to speech is working or not. And that is where you will spend a lot of time. But now you can just use an API and you can get acceptable quality and performances, right? So there is this difference between using AI through primitives and using AI through building blocks, like how you would use a Lego block. So that's the first difference between traditional versus generative. Now, generative, when people think about it, they only think about it through consumer use case, consumer lens, right? What it means is, am I using a chat GPT, a conversational interface, or am I using a product like Humane or things like that? The adoption and the challenges that are needed for consumers are very different from the ones that are there in enterprise. In enterprise, the most important thing that you have to keep in mind is you cannot, in many use cases, you cannot give guessing answers, right? One of the defining features of generative AI is it is able to make up things, and like in creative endeavors, it is fantastic. But when it comes to enterprises, you cannot take this guesses. You cannot take these guesstimates and then say, hey, maybe this is how it is going to happen. And the technical term for that is a hallucination. In enterprise AI, you cannot afford to have hallucination. In generative AI, you can say, oh, I was looking for this and some other thing came out. I asked for it to create a poem like this, but it made a mistake, and that mistake was a feature. But in enterprise, that is not possible. In enterprise, whenever this generative technologies are going to be adopted, they will be adopted in a way where there is tolerance for incorrectness or risks to be there. As less and less of that happens is how the enterprise AI adoption will happen.
This is a very interesting viewpoint. And that's why I feel that I think the whole competitive landscape in AI will be very different when you look at consumer applications versus kind of enterprise applications, and you look at various geographies. I think one of the big things that Sam Altman and OpenAI did was at least getting the AI out of these what you call as primitives, these very kind of high tech settings into the hands of a normal person, and which has I think completely unlocked the imagination of a normal person to financial markets to investors, and I think that's what's really kickstarted this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the chat interface in ChatGPT was very critical, right? Till the chat interface came, there are a lot of friends that you and I know who've been like toying with GPT-1, GPT-2, and things like that. But it was the GPT 3.5, which again had a certain architectural quirk, but then it was a chat interface that was layered on top, and then people used it, and then they said, wow, this is fantastic. So the interface was critical for the unlocking of AI adoption of the last, I don't know, maybe 16, 17 months.
Now, coming back to if you look at the AI stack, and very simply, there are three buckets, right? Which is infrastructure, applications, and dev tools. How should Indian startups look at each of these buckets, specifically with the lens of what is truly addressable by them?
So, Soumitra, you and I have been in the startup ecosystem for like decades now, right? And you and I know of companies which have tried to build the Google of India. They have tried to build the Facebook of India. And all of us know that the answer to Google of India is Google. The answer for Facebook for India is Facebook. I'm sure like there will be trials out that will be made right now. But what happens is when you're playing in the platform games are not restricted by country boundaries. Unless, of course, you're China, right? Where it'll stamp on a regulation and say, okay, Google not allowed. And then the regulation actually creates a Baidu and things like that. But what happens in platforms when you go at infra level where platform dynamics kicks in, global platforms win, right? So at the infra layer, OpenAI of India is going to be OpenAI, right? Or any foundation model company of India is going to be like the global foundation model that are there. Unless, of course, for sovereign reason, India as a country decides to actually build foundation model, which is very critical from a sovereign reason perspective. I would actually say like someone trying to build a foundation model from India or an infra company from India is not at a specific advantage, right? So unless they are competing directly with the Coheres, the Anthropics, and the OpenAIs of the world where you're like raising boatloads of money. One thing in general, I would say as a thumb rule is to see that what is your own unique advantage. Every country has to ask it, every individual has to ask, saying, what is your unique advantage? What are the things that you can uniquely bring towards the table? And I don't think infra is the space where, for an Indian founder, where it is a oligopoly, where like only 6 or 5 players that are going to be dominant in the market eventually, you can find an area of advantage unless it is backed by regulation and government. Right. So in which case, I would say the infra is not a great place to play in. But having said that, I have seen so many companies which have built infra tools, right? Where you're building the application, but to build the application, you need tools to build those tools, right? Those places, there are like handful of companies that have come up. Some have done really well. Like, Postman, we know as a great example. And they have built really good tools because India is a great developer market. There are many great developers out there and they understand the developer psyche. That is slightly better place to be in. I think where the advantage is the Indian founders can get into the depth of a use case way better than any other founders, at least I have seen. So I would say that Indian founders should look at applications. Within that, the areas that I'm particularly excited about is not those horizontals where, let's say, a valley in or like an incumbent would want to come and play if they know that this is $1 billion market. You pick applications which are vertical, unsexy, boring, that a valley plus an incumbent wouldn't want to come and play. And you get an edge and advantage because you can go deep in the use case and you know that there is going to be little competition from valley startups as well as incumbents. So in terms of picking an area, I would actually pick vertical, boring, unsexy space for to build an AI application. What do you think? What are your thoughts on the platform versus dev tools versus application? Where do you stand on that?
I would largely agree with you. I think infra is obviously going to be much harder just because a lot of these the foundational models are going to cut across geographies. They are also very capital intensive to build. They also require a certain kind of technical talent to be able to even make progress on these things. And a lot of that is more readily available in the US and particularly in the Bay Area. I mean, probably a lot of this is not even available in other Western countries, right? So I think there'll definitely be a need. Although I think Bhavesh Ovola will probably differ with both of us, and he's trying to kind of change that, which I'm all for. My view is that India should definitely have its own OpenAI. It's going to be hard, but I think there are founders who can make it happen. On the dev tool sides, I agree. I think dev tools is definitely going to be an opportunity. I think I have kind of a different question on dev tools, which is what is the right timing, or when is the right kind of why now going to happen for dev tools, right? Because AI itself is so early. Even the application layer the infra layer is early right now, right? And now you're seeing kind of the first generation applications coming up. How much lag will there be in terms of real dev tool adoption at scale, right? As infra and applications start getting developed. I think Indian founders definitely have the skill set, right, to make a dent there. Applications, I think, of course, there has been a lot of talk around it. If you look at Web 1.0, Web 2.0, right? I mean, applications is where the real value ultimately ends up getting created. I think Indian founders, especially over the last decade, have proven that they can build very deep vertical SaaS companies. And I think a lot of that skill set was very easily transferable. I think applications are just going to get supercharged with AI. I wrote a blog post about this a few months back that really to differentiate in the application layer in AI, at least I have and this is again my working hypothesis, I netted out to two things, which is you need data and you need workflows, right? Like data, because I mean, a lot of the data you need first party data to be able to train your models, to be able to come out with those kind of insights. And to get to data, you need go to market, right? You need to be ahead of competitors in terms of getting to customers first, which is anyway a classic requirement, right, of building any software product or SaaS company. Workflows, I think, will need to be reimagined with AI. And I think it's very similar to how, as cloud really started hitting an inflection point, the likes of Notions and Figma really reimagined how these same workflows that were happening on-prem or in more bulky software, how could they happen in a more collaborative environment on the browser, right, using cloud capabilities. I think similar things are going to happen in AI, which again brings to at least brought me to the point where classic product management becomes even more important, which is again a requirement of building any software product or SaaS company. So to me, at least in that, and that was I netted out in that post saying that look, so the nothing changes, right? You still need to execute in a similar way.
Yeah. I want to go back to that infra point, right? You and I think about it similarly. But if we were to challenge ourselves and then say, no, we can actually build infra company, somebody is doing that, then what are one or two, three things that they should do, you think?
I think you have to go local, right? I think the OpenAIs of the world and you have the Coheres and Anthropics, right? They will build those foundational capabilities. But I'm sure there are very deep localization capabilities, especially in a market like India. And again, I'm talking about this purely from the frame of reference of kind of Indian startups or India-based founders, right? I think India as a market is very deep, both in terms of the consumer side. It's a huge population, huge consumer base, internet base. Also on the enterprise, it's actually getting deeper. So there are enough opportunities there. It's a very different country. It's a very different culture to even other Asian countries. Leave aside the West. And even within India, there are a lot of these nuances. So and again, I don't know the right answer, whether this can actually be reflected in a differentiated product experience. But I think deep localization on language, on culture, on vernaculars, on how business really happens in that country, what people care about, specific security considerations. There are going to be these varieties of things which will require localization. And now, will that stop OpenAI and Cohere and Anthropic from
That
doing
was going to be my question. That
those
was my
localizations? Yeah, so that is where I think Indian founders will probably need to step up and create that differentiation and move fast. Also, accessing capital to be able to do that, and again, to do anything at the infra level will require a certain kind of founder who can raise that amount of capital, and even for investors to have that kind of risk appetite.
Yeah, I think the access to capital, the ability to raise capital, and then run faster than OpenAI and Cohere, and they are running fast, like in every week they
Yeah.
release, and being deeply local. And hopefully it's beyond languages is what somebody has to look at when they are looking at from an infra layer perspective.
Yeah.
So for me, on the application side that you said, that's very fascinating ways. You touched upon something about workflows.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've been thinking about is workflow compression. In application, what is going to happen is that what used to take, let's say, 15 steps will now happen in 1 or 2 steps, right? And how we are able to reimagine experiences because of AI and just do out of 2 steps, rather than taking 15 step. I think that is where it is going to be mind blowing. And I'm going to talk about a consumer use case, and I'm looking forward to seeing more enterprise on this. But I don't know if you've tried Suno. Suno.ai is one of my favorite applications of Gen AI of the recent past, right? I'm sure there will be other applications that will come and replace this. But Suno.ai allows you to generate a complete studio movie-like song in 2 minutes. And the experience is like this. You go to ChatGPT and then you say, I want to create a hit song for a movie, let's say Rajnikant or some other favorite Hindi singer. You can just ask ChatGPT or even Copilot Microsoft, any chat application to create lyrics. I'll create lyrics in your local language. You just copy paste it on Suno. And within 1 minute, I'll create a professional studio sounding quality of a song. Now, what would take 6 weeks to do this with coordination with multiple music directors and singers and multiple retakes, it compresses it into just 2 minutes. And that is mind blowing for me. It's just that the workflow compression that is happening there is just so phenomenal. Of course, one can argue that whether it's a feature company or maybe it is better inside a tool set like Adobe or like maybe inside Runway ML, where end to end selling that needs to be done to a musician like IR Rahman. Those are the business part of it. But just at the use case level, the compression from 6 weeks to 2 minutes is mind blowing, right? And that is the kind of applications that are possible using generative AI. And when they are going to happen within enterprise, it'll be massive, right? So we cannot imagine the kind of applications that are going to come out. That workflow compression is something that I'm looking forward to as a theme. And I'm seeing like interesting experiments come out of that particular thing.
And it actually reminds me of something that I think Tobi of Shopify mentioned recently, right? Where Shopify in its early days was rejected by most VCs.
Yeah.
Right. And what sort of they came back with was that, hey, your TAM is too small because there are only 50,000 merchants in the entire market in the US. And I think now in hindsight, what Toby mentioned was that they actually underestimated that when you remove inertia and friction from systems, then your addressable market just explodes. And so basically the problem that the VCs identified that, hey, there are only 50,000 merchants, Shopify was actually the solution for that problem, that they are actually going to reduce the friction for somebody to start becoming a seller. And today you have more than 1 million merchants on Shopify. So I think it comes down to that point where AI is going to play a similar role of really reducing friction from systems. In fact, to your point, I think Suno sounds like a super interesting company and use case. As a new podcaster, I've been playing around with a lot of software. And actually, I got this insight like a couple of days back, where when I was doing post prod on my previous episode, I realized that somebody like me probably could not have become a podcaster like 7 years back, or the effort to becoming a podcaster would have been so high that I would not have taken it up. But now with all the software, and now you have AI features in all the post-prod software, right? They take out filler words, they tell you how in one click you insert music, you clean up things, you insert clips. So everything has become so easy. So now I'm like, okay, the TAM of podcasting itself will grow and it'll be much bigger than we probably think that it's a niche, but it's actually not going to be a niche. Everyone can be a podcaster.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree, right? And it goes to that point that I talked about saying that product experience is going to be critical. And then when you build this new experience that people have not seen before, then many of the assumptions that you make with old setting or old product, like they are irrelevant. I would have also made the same assessment saying, oh, the TAM seems very small. The product experience unlocked the TAM. The way I explain it to a few people now is saying that there is a difference between Microsoft Word and Google Docs. And when Google Docs came first time, you cannot compare, you cannot explain what Google Docs does unless you have put into that experience of saying, how do you collaboratively edit a document? And you were trying to explain it using a PowerPoint, a pitch deck, or like a conversation, you just don't get it. You have to actually immerse yourself. So one of the things that I'm very fascinated now is and I've now made it as a rule for me, is like trying product experiences. I'm like, if you want to figure out Gen AI, not even videos. I'm like, okay, go put your hands into it. And then you can say, oh, what can it do? What can it not do? And not really evaluate anything or judge anything by just like looking at a conversation or a presentation or things like that. So experience is going to be very critical.
That's great. Yeah. You're giving yourself an opportunity to imagine things. And that's, I think, a key job of a venture investor. No, love it. I want to spend some time on the India domestic AI opportunity, and both on the enterprise side as well as on the consumer side. And we mentioned the work that Bhavish is doing. What do you think of that?
I built a B2C startup 15 years ago, right? And after that, and I was young back then, and it did well in terms of adoption, but then the real money can be made in enterprise. So I switched over to enterprise and have very little knowledge now, I would say, about on the consumer side. Even as a user, I use very few applications. So I don't understand the dynamics of what is happening from a consumer perspective. But on enterprise, I have spent time at Intuit. I was leading product for QuickBooks. And I was also working with a lot of software startups since 2009, I would say, in trying to sell to the India market. And even today, even though there are few folks who have, some of my friends have challenged my mental model around this, but even today, if you ask me, I would say that it is easy to earn a dollar than to earn a rupee. Right? This is the first sentence that I start with when start working with founders and helping them figure out like what and where they should build. I tell them that it is much easier for you to actually go for a dollar market than to actually go for the India market. Of course, in our business, we cannot say it never happens. There was the whole argument around e-commerce 15 years ago where many investors burned their hand investing into India Time Shopping and others. And then somebody took a bet on Flipkart, and we know the story is different now. So I thought the same moment is going to happen for software in 2016, 17 when GST came. I still don't think from a software domestic market perspective, there is a unlock that has happened the way it happened in the consumer market when Flipkart unlocked the market. But I'm still hopeful. I still feel that when the GDP per capita is different, much higher, where productivity starts mattering, then there will be a lot of purchase of software that happen. If we really think about software, right? Software is about a simple pitch. It is saying, look, you are doing a lot of these things which takes you a lot of manual time. Let me compress it for you. So it's the core pitch of a software is a productivity pitch, and productivity is not high value right now in domestic markets. But however, a few friends, Keka and few others who have built like really good businesses in India, now they went after a audience which is startups who actually care about that productivity, and that's why they see attraction there. Now, on the other hand, there are also enterprises. The enterprises, what they are doing is they are trying to figure out between an SAP, IBM, or a local company that should pick and purchase. And I would actually say the last maybe 8 or 9 years ago, most of them were going with SAP and IBM choices. But last 2 or 3 years, they are actually getting really irritated with all these global brands, because for all these global brands, India as a market and an opportunity is very small. Enterprises in India are used to people coming to their offices and selling things to them. And SAPs and IBMs of the world are not going to do that. Salesforce is not going to do that, right? So they get that third cousin treatment. So they are now warming up to the idea of buying more and more software from local Indian providers. And that trend also will increase. So one is the per capita becoming more and productivity start mattering. The other is that like local buyers, they want to actually not pick a global brand and want to pick a local brand so that they are having better relationship, better customer support. So all these trends makes me very optimist about this. But even today, if somebody asks me saying, okay, I'm building, where do I have the fastest growth? I'm like, start with the dollar market.
Taking your point forward, I want to put forth an idea for all the India-based founders out there, right? One interesting thing I'm seeing, especially on the large enterprise side, domestically within India. So you look at a Tata Group or an Ambani, these companies are essentially, they have a very high bar for software, right? If you are able to sell to them, you can sell to any enterprise in the world. So I'm seeing this as an opportunity for Indian founders, especially who are doing a 0 to 1, to really get these logos on board as enterprise design partners, make them happy, build your product out, but then quickly use those logos and use that as a springboard to start going global, right? And if I compare to 10 years back, it was a binary option, right? There were really no early adoption in India for software. But now I think that's changing, right? So you can, as a founder, especially in the early stages, be strategic in taking that call that, okay, I have limited resources, I need to be capital efficient, I still need to get, build out the first product. Let me use kind of domestic design partners, but then be very smart in terms of when do I make that transition of just quickly then going outside India and start selling.
Yeah. Even though I would say one thing, Soumitra, and this is where we may be saying slightly different things. I think you earn and learn in the same market. Which is that you may actually go to India, speak to Tatas, and then get some revenue. But that product is not going to be exportable. One of the things that I always share with founders is that product market fit is not exportable. Now, you can use that logo, that presence, that revenue to help you springboard, but you cannot use that product to actually take you to a different market. And I at least can say from experience, like when I was running QuickBooks, that we thought we could go GA in France in 18 months, and it took us 4 years, and we were not GA. They thought we could go GA in India really quickly. And every market that we have gone, and back then we were like an SMB company. In enterprise, there is this saying that if you talk to like different geographies, you can get a death by 1,000 cut, right? In case of SMB, it is like 100,000 cut. So every geography, it turns out to be like a different product market fit. But I agree with what you said about use that experience and then credibility to go have those and the resources to go have the global conversation. But time and again, and more enterprise that you go, what I have seen is people go to a different geography. They think that they only have to layer on GTM, but they end up like rebuilding the product from scratch, right? Sometimes it's not even the same product, right? It's a different ICP, different messaging, different positioning, different pitch altogether, different GTM motion. Then I'm like, okay, what is left of the product? So when you change geography, then this happens. And I have seen it happen often enough.
Yeah, no, this is a very valid point. So I think it's important, I think, both for founders as well as investors to really study their vertical, their kind of target market very closely and take that call in terms of when to make that transition. But moving on, I think post AI, we have really been hearing this phrase from, especially from investors, that SaaS is dead, right? Now, of course, you have been doing SaaS investing for many years now, and now you are seeing this transition into AI. What are some of your observation in terms of how SaaS is evolving pre and post AI? What is staying the same and what is changing?
I wrote a blog post a few weeks ago saying, "Is SaaS dead?" And the title says, "Is SaaS dead?" It depends on who you are asking. So if you ask a founder, they will freak out, right? That I thought this is the place where you can actually finally build a real sustainable business, because in B2C, you like throw out 15 ideas, one stick, and then if you get lucky, then you build on top of that, right? That's how it works in B2C. But in at least B2B, there was a method to the madness. And now you're saying that, oh, this gets disrupted, it is dead. Then a lot of SaaS founders freaked out. Like a lot of people actually came and freaked out personally to me saying, oh, what are you saying? So that's the first thing about if you say SaaS is dead, because founders are still having conversation, revenue is still getting created. It is slowed down compared to the last 2 years, but still a lot of businesses are out there. So there was this one CIO I was speaking to a few weeks ago, and she said, oh, if you say SaaS is dead, then what will we go back to on-prem? No, we are not going to go to the on-prem kind of world. Now, if you ask investors, they are, of course, saying, oh, I'm not sure what the future of SaaS is, right? Because if you look at it again from an India-US angle perspective, it's very hard to build another Freshworks, which is start from zero and go to $500 million of revenue or $1 billion of revenue. And people are finding it hard to imagine that. And the reason for that is that like in across the world, SaaS is proliferated so much. I think there are at least about maybe 75,000 SaaS startups, $250 billion of SaaS revenue. And practically, if you translate it to an independent enterprise, they have 42 tools. They're spending $500,000 on, let's say, a simple marketing stack, and they're not getting half of the outcomes out of that, right? So for investors, they are like, look, this is a complicated ecosystem. I don't know how you will enter this ecosystem and build a outlier business, which is what investors care for. And therefore, they are thinking about the world not today, like 10 years from today. They are imagining that and then saying, 20 years from now, can I imagine a SaaS company to go public? Maybe not. 5 or 7 years from now, can I imagine a SaaS company to go more than $100 million in M&A? Maybe not. That's the question they are asking. And usually what happens, Soumitra, is that most people, when they're debating and fighting, they're just having different horizons that they look at. What Morgan Housel says, right? Day trader versus a VC investor will say, both of you are wrong. They're just looking at different horizons. So the founder is looking at a different horizon. The investor is looking at a different horizon. The things that I'm hearing from the CIOs is that, yeah, they're also hearing this chatter, but for them, the issue is a little different. The issue is that they're just dealing with the mess of too many tools. And that is where they're saying, hey, what is the alternate to this? So the conversation that I had with the CIO is more around saying, okay, look, SaaS is a pricing model. When you say SaaS, it involves some amount of subscription, some amount of repeatability, repeat usage. And that is something that you have purchased. And maybe some over enthusiastic sales guys have come and sold you 500 licenses when your sales for a 700 people organization, while your sales team is only 100. And then you say, oh, what are we doing with this rest of the 400 extra seats that we purchased? Then you're looking at utilization. So I actually feel for these folks, what they will start asking as a tough question to their vendors is, why am I paying as subscription for something that I'm not using? So that'll actually shift more from a recurring subscription model, and thanks to AI, to more an outcome model. And the moment you folks are going to start doing that, then the customers will demand that everybody do that. So for Intercom is doing that, right? So it is saying that, look, I'm not going to charge you on a seat basis, but you care about that support query not being there. So I'm going to charge you on an outcome basis. Now, over a period of time, we will see adjustment that will happen because of AI in the pricing model, in the business model, and that is the big shift that will happen, I feel. What are you seeing?
I think and this is one of my thesis, which is I think pre-AI, a lot of the SaaS was actually very incremental if you look at it, and especially if you look at it from the lens of cross-border from India, right? So you had a fresh desk, which closely followed on the heels of a Zendesk, and you had everything from payroll processing to like productivity, CRM, MarTech, right? Some sort of an ERP system, right? A lot of those kind of companies getting created. I think that, in my view, is basically going to become like services, IT services of the 90s and early 2000s, right? Because it's just a lot of that is going to become so simple that you're going to have these services companies, dev shops everywhere from Eastern Europe to Latin America to even from India and even from the tier 2, 3, 4 cities of India, right? Building these small businesses, right? Are they going to be very differentiated venture returns, $1 billion valuation kind of companies? Quite unlikely, right? So I think the real opportunity now is for what I call as differentiated software or non-incremental SaaS, right? Which is you have to go deep into domains, you have to solve deep problems because AI is solving a lot of your coding. It's solving a lot of your intelligence, right? Like the value of writing code to automate something, AI is going to do it. So there is no more differentiation in that. So the differentiation has to now come from deep domain understanding, really going to the L2, L3 level, right? Of things like automotive, manufacturing, oil and gas, energy, right? Right. Really going and saying, okay, these are the problems, these are business problems which were probably pre-AI unviable, right? Like
Yeah.
you could not solve them, or even if you solved them, like nobody would pay you like $1 million for it. And that was your cost of solving it. Now, and we talked about the point of workflow compression and reducing friction, that viability is now just getting massively unlocked, where you have all this legacy data from 10 years in an oil and gas company. Now you can go in and go to town on it and figure out efficiencies and figure out things that can actually be unlocked as use cases, right? So that is where I feel is going to be the opportunity. And I think it'll require a little bit of shift from the classic Indian founder persona of, hey, let's build this out quickly. Let me take this to market quickly. There's a cost advantage that I have, to really saying, I'm going to build expertise, right, in an area.
So you said something, I'm going to anchor to that and do a quick plug. I wrote this report 2 months ago on AI SaaS opportunity, right? So the two parts that you said, one is on the vertical, right? Go really deep into a domain. And I call that as the unsexy, boring vertical that neither the incumbent nor the Silicon Valley want to come and play, right?
Yeah.
The spaces, right? So that is like a great place to actually go and see what can you solve using AI. But then the other part that you said is more around like making sure that there are outcomes.
Yep.
The services companies have traditionally been really good at outcomes, right? So they hire cheap engineering talent from wherever they can find. And then they do a great job of managing the customer's expectation. And anybody who actually does a services project is actually doing like largely because of that, they are able to just outsource their risk or ability to project manage to somebody else. And they just ask them question. And the Accentures, the McKinseys, and the Infosys and the Cognizant have actually built like large businesses doing that account management for large Fortune 500 companies. Now, with AI, the cost of development has actually become 100x lower. So they may not even hire these cheap engineering talent across different geographies. They can actually use these automated AI building tools and then do the same outcome to these customers. So that is one big opportunity which I've also talked about in the report, saying that $250 billion SaaS opens up to $1.3 trillion of services, right? So the software as a service and services, that category kind of merges. I call it a software and services. Different people are using different terms on that on Twitter, but this is the underlying theme of saying that, look, outcome focus, how you actually use software to give better outcomes so that the like the CIOs, the customers, they are not inundated with more tools, but they get more outcome. That's a massive opportunity.
Yep. And I think riffing a little bit more on that, I want to play out a scenario and really get your thoughts, especially given that you really get involved with companies at a very early accelerator stage. So there's a very common scenario I'm seeing where there's a founder who started up pre-ChatGPT, right? So was probably building some sort of a SaaS or software product company, has got it to some traction, let's say anywhere from 100K to a million ARR, and then boom, ChatGPT has come out. The world is not going to be the same again. There is all the stuff, all the good stuff that we have spoken about so far in the episode is happening around them. How do they deal with it? How do they stay relevant? And in fact, how do they even make this into a strength?
Yeah, it's a great question. Like last year, I wrote a blog post, was shared in a lot of WhatsApp group on how to not get disrupted by OpenAI. And I talked about three scenarios saying between 0 to 1 million, 1 million to 10 million, and 10 million to 100 million. Right. In each of these cases, how do you actually deal with it? 0 to 1 million, I'd say that if you are a founder who understands the domain really deeply, and we work with companies, maybe startups where founders are at least 40 plus or 35, where they've spent 10, 15 years understanding a domain. So if you're someone who's from that particular domain, then they think about how can you use AI and not really focus on the specific pain point that you are looking at, but look at your entire value chain and say, hey, where can AI come and solve the problem in a way that you will not have imagined before. So ask that particular question, stay in the domain. But if you are in that 0 to 1 mil category and you are a developer, somehow you're trying to actually figure out your idea, I would say that go build a lot more things on the dev tool side, right? Because that's where you will have more domain understanding, and that particular space is again going through a reconfiguration. But if you're between 1 million and 10 million, that means that you found an ICP, you found some positioning, you've picked a geography, a segment, and then you know that some messaging and things like that are working. There, my recommendation is that look at what is happening in your competition space. What are competitors doing? And the way to look at it is, of course, you look at the immediate competitors that are coming in your deals, but also look at people that are adjacent to that and look at what are category redefinition that they are doing, what are pricing model redefinition that they are doing. Let's say you're building on the customer support software, like you will get disrupted by the intercom type offering, where somebody comes and says, don't pay me for seats and pay me for this. And they also look at what are they bundling on top of offering. I was just having a conversation 2 weeks ago where this particular company that I work with, they had a core product feature. And then they were thinking about adding this AI plus feature, but then they were losing deals because somebody else had this AI plus feature as the main feature. And then they said, hey, the core feature also we will package in. Right. So you have to look at competition and then see, are you losing spots inside conversation because these new features were released, new adjacency players have come in, or new pricing models they have introduced? That's what I would say for those between that are 1 and 10. For those between 2 and 10 and 100, I would actually say that you'll have to sit down and have a deep strategy conversation. We have to look at your value chain. We have to look at your strategy. And one tool that we are very fond of, we use internally, is called Wadley Map. We say, okay, let's sit down and build your Wadley Map and then see what part of the value chain has been completely reconfigured. And you have to execute really fast. Of course, there are people elements of this. One of the things that I like to say with a chuckle is we need wartime CEOs, not peacetime CEOs. So you need to run really fast. And what I say is that you have to remove the Sundar in your organization and bring the Satya in the organization. You cannot be just operating, oh, you know what, things are all going okay and nothing else has happened. Everybody just hypes things up. I would say that if you're a 10 to 100 million like ARR company CEO, you have to be like paranoid and see who is taking away your lunch. You cannot say, oh, this is just some bunch of like podcasters and Gartners and investors just hyping things up. Of course, there is always hype, right? And we all know from just studying the last 10, 20 years of technology that We ignored a lot of hype. There were like a lot of hype during .com. .com gave birth to some amazing companies like Amazon and Netscape and browsers and things like that, right? It's the job of the founder and also the investor to find the signal from the noise. It is always going to be very noisy. So the job of a CEO or a founder who's between 10 to 100 million is much more harder than the 0 to 1 and the 1 to 10.
Yeah, no,
What
totally.
do you say? What do you say?
Yeah, I say this. I'm saying this to all my portfolio companies as well as any kind of founders that I meet, is really pushing them to think hard on product differentiation and on right to win. I think this has been my pet peeve, and having just been in the US India venture corridor now for more than 15 years, I don't think there is enough intellectually honest discourse or rigorous discussion that happens around why should we exist? Why should we win? Right? Why will our product win in the market? Right? If we benchmark this, if we put this out there in the competitive landscape, why should we win? What are we doing differently? Why are we uniquely positioned to dominate the segment? Why are we creating a category or not? I remember when I started my career in venture, this is the first thing you were taught, right? And way back in 2011, that what is your competitive advantage? What's your differentiation? What's your unique value proposition, right? Is there defensibility in the business, intellectual property? I felt during ZERP, a lot of those discussions really fell to the wayside, even at the board level. And it was a lot of it was just about growth, because there was access to cheap capital, right? So even with a less differentiated product, you could really do a land grab, even on the enterprise and SaaS side, by having enough capital. And now that world has changed, right?
Really. More valuation, even growth, right? I don't know whether they were having growth. They were having.
Yeah, true. Very good point. Great. No, this has been amazing. One last question, and which is where I see a lot of founders, a lot of Indian founders are very curious about best practices for US go to market. And of course, you are running an accelerator and you have a bunch of very early stage AI companies. I'm sure like a few of them are a little bit further along as well. What are you seeing in terms of some interesting things that the Upekkha AI portfolio companies are doing today, where they're still India based, but they're actually getting traction in the US? They're actually able to drive progress in the US market.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer to this. I can actually only do a couple of observations on this because one of the things that I think from an India US founder advantage perspective is like the whole India US is about how do you shift your front office versus back office. The whole India US corridor has been there for 30, 40 years now, starting with the Infosys and then the IT moving services. And very recently, since 2011 onwards, or maybe 7 onwards, the whole India US corridor emerged for from SaaS perspective. See, before that, it was all back office. India was like the back office of the world. Like what SaaS did was it said you can even have front office. Like Zoho and Freshworks actually said that we can put salespeople, marketing people, we can put the management teams in India, and then we can still build large businesses. And every SaaS company to me from India is actually a good instantiation of how are you splitting the back office and the front office between the geographies. And that is where the advantage that is coming. It's not that it is a cost-effective R&D center. That was like long ago conversation. The conversation for SaaS has been in your LDR, SDR, AE. You're like the guy who's generating the lead, the guy who's actually nurturing the lead, and the guy who's actually closing the deal, right? And the steps before that. How are you actually bringing him into your website or to your sales team's conversation? That marketing plus LDR, SDR, what is the split of that, right? That is where each of the SaaS companies from India are very unique. And wherever people just try to follow templates, it doesn't work, right? A Whatfix template doesn't follow the Freshworks template, and Freshworks template works for Freshworks, Whatfix for Whatfix, and each of them are finding their own template. Now, what I would say is that for me also, my experience is when these companies are getting to maybe 0 to 1 and maybe 1 to 10. So I have very less visibility on what's working beyond 10. Now, with respect to AI, I'm not seeing like a whole lot of difference. The only small differences that I'm seeing is the use of influencers. And if you actually think about just the general go-to-market of how companies are getting tractions just in SF, right? So they are all very influencer driven. There is this company which was like Devin, but nobody knows. And that founder had launched 6 months before Devin launched. And then when Devin launched, it had 100,000 followers. And then it was the talk of the town. And this founder was like cribbing on Twitter saying, I have the same product. And why is that Devin has so much of traction? Because Devin actually pulled off the go-to-market really in a brilliant kind of a way, because it connected with all the relevant influencers, Gary Tan, Elard Gill, everybody else who matter in the AI space. And then when they say, hey, this is cool, then all the AI influencers, there are like maybe 500 to 1,000 or maybe 1,500 newsletters that are out there that are writing about AI. They all piled on it. Then there were Twitter threads, and then there were LinkedIn videos and things like that. So suddenly, like, everybody came to know about what Devin is. So influencers is a very key channel that people are using to spread the word around. Now, whether it is B2C or B2B. See, today in B2B, most of like the CIO purchase happens because either you're featured in Gartner or Forrester. But the space of AI is moving so fast that in 6 months, it is 10x further ahead than what it was before. So by the time a Gartner or a Forrester could actually make a recommendation, the space has moved. So Gartners and Forresters are today not the influencer in the AI space. Someday they will be. But today, all these enterprises are also saying, okay, let me go talk to the most techie person who understands this space and ask him, what should we try? Again, it goes back to that techie influencer. So what I'm seeing from an Upekkha perspective is they're also saying, looking at this and then saying, okay, how do I leverage some of these influencers? I don't think the influencer ecosystem is built out that well in India. And anyway, for those that are selling in the US, the influencers in India are going to be less relevant. So they are tapping into this influencer network and then figuring out how they can get the word about them, right? Some of them are even like running these newsletters as paid newsletters. So if you can get featured in these newsletters, and those are the things that I'm seeing like getting experimented right now.
I think influencers, it's a key marketing channel, but I think this brings forth a gap that I have seen in sort of Indian startups, at least classically, where kind of Indian startups and Indian founders in general are good at sales, but they are weak at marketing. And I think, and I'm a believer now that we live in a marketing demand gen world. Every person who knows your brand, who comes in as a warm lead, is kind of worth their weight in gold. And I think this is where probably this is an area of potential growth that the Indian AI and software ecosystem needs to make sure that kind of their sort of Indian founders are really working on this to get better at this.
Yeah, there's one more thing that I'm getting reminded of, and this is again like a peculiar or a unique case, right? This is just not marketing, but this is an investment that many founders have done. So there are many founders within Upekkha, maybe very little in Upekkha, but more outside that I'm seeing is that these founders have spent maybe 3, maybe 4, 5 years getting to just about a certain limited level of traction. But they have done a great job of building their SEO channels, their content marketing channels, that they have cracked the distribution. But they are having products which are very commodity products, which is this might be like a marketing tool where there are like 15 other players that are there. But these folks, when they release a Gen AI product with that traction channel, that the distribution that they had, they are suddenly seeing 3x, 4x growth or more, right? And that I am seeing more examples of from India, where they have taken many years to actually build this channel. And now they spend the last 6 to 9 months building a new Gen AI relevant product, like, or put out a feature set. And then they are seeing, oh, there is a hockey stick growth. Now people will only measure their like last 12 months of growth. A lot of effort has gone into in the past, in that 3 or 4 years where they have built the distribution. So that is another thing that I am seeing is working out well for founders from India. Therefore, what I would say is that all those founders who have actually spent many years building the distribution channel, they should seriously think about building their Gen AI version or offering. They should not say, oh, this is just hype and I don't want to just fall into that hype again. If you have built a distribution already, then think about building a Gen AI offering.
And I think for founders, for first-time founders who are just about getting into the game or who are early in the game, I think look at Dharmesh of HubSpot. I think the amount of social that he does around ChatSpot and around whatever HubSpot is doing, if Dharmesh feels the need to do that much marketing for HubSpot, then you better get on social, get on Twitter, LinkedIn, build your following, build your newsletters, blog, go to events, put yourself out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
This has been a great session, Rajan. I think you and I, of course, are both super excited about the US-India corridor and the potential for Indian founders to build global businesses. I think personally, I'm a big believer in the agility, the grit, the street smartness of Indian founders. and I think they will find their way in AI, right? And so I think these were very interesting insights as kind of people are at various stages of really leveraging this very generational moment in time.
Yeah, good fun to chat, Sumitra, again.